I eased my key into the lock, the late afternoon sun still spilling soft gold across the porch. The house smelled faintly of cut grass and the faint sweetness of my mother's rose bushes, comforting scents that usually meant home. Today, they made my stomach twist. Inside, the low hum of voices floated from the hallway. My parents' voices, hushed, urgent. I slipped off my heels, wincing as the strap left a red mark across my ankle. The silk sleeve of my blouse clung to the perspiration on my arm. September in Maine always managed to fool me with its crisp mornings and heavy, lingering afternoons. I followed the sound to my bedroom door, half open. Mom's back was to me, her hair pulled into that familiar practical bun. She held one of my framed photographs, my first solo hike in the Rockies, before tucking it into a cardboard box already brimming with my things. Dad sealed another box with a decisive rip of packing tape. "We'll surprise her," Mom whispered. "She'll thank us once she sees the studio. Less space, less clutter." Studio? I pressed a hand against the doorframe to steady myself. A studio apartment. A life they were apparently moving me into without so much as a conversation. My phone buzzed in my purse, a calendar reminder for tomorrow's board meeting. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. Both of them turned. "Charlotte." Mom gasped, her face flushing. "You're home early." So was I, and apparently just in time to watch my life being packed away. I can still smell that rainy evening every time the memory sneaks up on me. Wet asphalt and the faint sweetness of the lilacs Mom always kept by the front porch. I was 22, freshly graduated and ready to conquer the world, or at least a small piece of it. My resume was printed on heavy linen paper, my heart brimming with plans for a downtown apartment and a first real job in marketing. But the house that had once felt like a fortress of love greeted me with an eerie stillness. The hallway lights were off. Only the kitchen glowed, a pool of yellow against the shadows. Dad leaned against the counter, arms folded, his face as unreadable as the storm clouds outside. Mom stood by the sink, drying a dish that had long been dry. The hush between them was so thick I almost whispered, "Hi." "Charlotte," Mom finally said, and the dish towel twisted tighter in her hands. "We need to talk." The words came out like a verdict. They decided, for me, that my next step was to move into a tiny studio apartment they'd already toured. "It'll keep you grounded," Dad said, his voice clipped, the same tone he used when telling me to mow the lawn as a kid. Grounded. My throat tightened until it burned. "I have a job interview next week, downtown. I can afford a place on my own." Mom exchanged a quick glance with him, the kind that says don't push her. But she pushed anyway. "Sweetheart, independence is harder than you think. We don't want you making mistakes." I felt my palms sweat, my nails biting into my skin. "So, you're packing my things without even asking?" Neither of them denied it. Something inside me splintered, sharp and cold. Behind me, the front door creaked open. Grandma June had arrived unannounced, her umbrella dripping on the mat. She took in the tension like a seasoned storm chaser. "Well," she said, her voice calm but steel-edged, "it seems this conversation needs another point of view." She pressed a small silver locket into my palm, so discreetly my parents never saw. "For when you need to remember who you are," she whispered. That night, I didn't scream or slam doors. I simply packed my own bag, locket warm against my heart, and walked into the rain. The sound of it on the pavement drowned out every word they tried to call after me. I'll never forget the first night I unlocked the door to my own tiny apartment in Brooklyn. The key stuck at first. Old paint sealed the edges of the frame. But when it finally turned, I stepped into a space that smelled faintly of dust and possibility. It was barely bigger than a generous walk-in closet. The pipes rattled every time the upstairs neighbor ran water, and a single streetlight cast amber stripes through the crooked blinds. But it was mine. I spread a thrift store blanket across the floor and sat cross-legged, eating cold lo mein from the carton, staring at the ceiling as if it might reveal my future. My chest ached with a cocktail of terror and exhilaration. For the first time, I wasn't someone's daughter being told what I could or couldn't do. I was just me, Harper Lane, armed with a battered laptop, a secondhand coffee maker, and the stubborn conviction that I could build a life no one could shrink down to fit their expectations. Days blurred into nights. I worked double shifts as a barista while taking free online courses in digital design. At first, the terms vector paths, hex codes felt like a foreign language. But every evening after closing the cafe, I'd hunch over my laptop in the flickering light of that same crooked street lamp, replaying tutorials until my eyes burned. There were plenty of moments when doubt crept in. I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened cafe window, hair pulled back in a messy knot, hands dusted with espresso grounds, and wonder if my parents had been right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for more than something safe. But each time the thought surfaced, I'd run my thumb over the smooth edge of the silver locket my late grandmother had given me. Inside was a tiny slip of paper with her slanted handwriting. "Your wings already exist. All you have to do is fly." That locket became my quiet armor. When a small marketing firm finally replied to one of my countless emails, offering me a trial project designing social media graphics, I almost dropped my phone. I poured every ounce of energy into those first assignments, color palettes carefully chosen, typography balanced like a tightrope. The client loved it. They sent more work. Soon, freelance gigs turned into retainer contracts. I learned to negotiate, to bill, to chase late payments without flinching. 6 months later, a well-known lifestyle brand hired me to lead a major campaign. I remember buying a single fresh lily for my apartment after that phone call, setting it in a chipped glass jar on the windowsill. Its scent filled the room like a quiet promise. I was no longer merely surviving. I didn't post much about my success. To my parents, my life looked modest, an occasional snapshot of a latte or a skyline, nothing more. I kept my victories folded close, like a secret letter waiting for the right moment to be opened. Because deep down, I knew a day would come when that hidden life would rise to meet the past I'd left behind. The sound of my heels on the polished marble floor echoed like a quiet drumroll as I entered the loft. The space smelled faintly of lavender and cedarwood, a scent I'd grown to love because it meant home. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the open living room in late-afternoon gold, catching the edges of the modern art pieces I'd collected from local galleries. And there they were. My parents, Margaret and Daniel, stood frozen near the glass coffee table, their hands mid-gesture, as if the expensive crystal bowl in front of them had suddenly turned into evidence of some crime. Mom clutched her purse to her chest like a shield, while Dad's eyes darted from the abstract painting on the wall to the grand piano in the corner, his mouth parting in something between awe and confusion. "Charlotte," Mom's voice cracked. Is this where you live?" I set my bag down deliberately on the walnut console table and offered the faintest smile. "Yes, Mom. This is my home." They looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was just the way the 12-foot ceilings dwarfed them. Dad reached for the back of the leather sofa, steadying himself. "But you said you were in a studio." "That's what you assumed," I said, keeping my tone even. "I never corrected you." Silence stretched. The city skyline glimmered behind them like a quiet witness. Mom finally whispered, "We thought you might need help packing because you believed I couldn't possibly handle life on my own?" My words weren't sharp, but they sliced anyway. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Dad's gaze lingered on the row of framed awards above the sideboard, plaques for design innovation, a photo of me shaking hands with a Fortune 500 CEO, the cover of an architectural magazine featuring my firm's newest skyscraper. "You designed these buildings?" he asked, his voice hushed. "All of them," I replied, stepping closer. "I'm the founder and lead architect of Carter and Moore." Dad blinked, recognition dawning. "Carter and Moore? That's your firm?" I nodded once. "The same one you read about in the journal last year when you said, 'Whoever runs this must have had all the right connections.'" The color drained from Mom's face. She glanced toward the sleek kitchen, where the marble waterfall island gleamed beneath pendant lights. You never said." "I never had the chance," I interrupted softly. "You were too busy telling me I was chasing childish dreams. That no one builds a career on creativity." that I should settle for something safe and small. Their silence roared. I crossed to the built-in bookshelves and pulled out a worn sketchbook, its cover frayed, corners bent. The same one my grandmother had given me the night I left home. I laid it gently on the coffee table. Remember this? Mom's breath hitched. Your grandmother's gift, she said, almost inaudibly. She believed in me when no one else did. Every building I've designed began as a sketch in here. I brushed my fingertips over the pages. I built a life you never imagined for me, without your approval, without your help. Dad lowered his eyes, shame flickering across his face. I straightened, letting the quiet linger until it became heavy. So when I came home early and found you packing my things, assuming you needed to help me move into a tiny studio, understand this. I don't need rescuing. I never did. The city lights beyond the windows sparked to life, reflecting in the glass like 1,000 tiny affirmations. Mom finally looked up, her voice trembling. Charlotte, we didn't know. I know, I said, a mixture of ache and triumph threading through my chest. But now you do. I took a slow sip of my latte, letting the silence stretch until it pressed against the walls. The scent of roasted espresso curled in the air, warm and steady, while my parents shifted uneasily on the velvet chairs across from me. For the first time in years, I felt no trace of the timid girl who once begged for their approval. I'm willing to help, I began, my voice low but firm. But not like before. Not on your terms. My mother's hands, usually so precise, twisted the strap of her leather bag. Avery, we didn't mean. I raised a hand gently. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. And before I consider anything, there are conditions. My father's brows knit together. He'd built a career on controlling every room he entered, but tonight the balance had shifted. His silence was almost a concession. First, I said, meeting my mother's eyes, you both need to downsize, not because of money, but because you hide behind that house. It's like a fortress for old grudges. Find something smaller, cozier, a place that forces you to actually live with each other, not just near each other. My mother blinked, startled. Second, I continued, Dad, you've spent years dismissing other people's dreams, mine included, because you were too afraid of failure. I want you to finally write the memoir you've talked about since I was a kid. Stop mocking other people's risks and take one yourself. His jaw tightened, the way it always did when he felt cornered. But he didn't argue. And Mom, I said softly, you've spent your whole life smoothing everyone else's rough edges. It's time to nurture something that's only yours. Remember the art classes you loved before you got married? Enroll again. Paint. Even if no one ever sees a single canvas. Her eyes glistened. I set the cup down, the porcelain clicking against the marble tabletop. Lastly, this one's non-negotiable. You both need to stop treating me like a project to fix or a child to manage. I'm not your cautionary tale. I'm your daughter, yes, but I'm also a woman who built her own life. Respect that. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. My father exhaled, shoulders sagging in a way I'd never seen. That's fair, he said finally, his voice rough. My mother reached for his hand. We can do that, she whispered, almost to herself. For the first time in years, I saw them not as the all-powerful figures of my childhood, but as two flawed, frightened people trying to unlearn old habits. I rose, smoothing the hem of my cream blouse. I'll help you with the logistics when you're ready. But this, I gestured around my loft, at the walls lined with the art I'd collected and the shelves filled with my hard-won successes. This life is mine. I decide who gets to be part of it. My mother gave a trembling nod. My father's eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw pride, not in what I'd achieved, but in the woman I had become. I smiled faintly, the weight of years loosening from my chest. Then we understand each other. The house felt different that evening, lighter, almost as if the walls themselves had finally exhaled. I stood in the doorway of the tiny studio apartment my parents had once deemed perfect for a girl like you, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a museum exhibit of a life I'd outgrown. My mother lingered by the narrow kitchenette, her fingers tracing the chipped laminate counter. My father sat stiffly on the only chair, shoulders sloped in a quiet humility I'd never seen before. The silence between us wasn't the heavy, accusatory kind anymore. It was tentative, like a new language we were all just beginning to speak. I set down the small ceramic bird that Mrs. Whitaker had given me all those years ago, a silly, fragile thing I'd once hidden in my purse when I left home. Back then, it had felt like a promise. Fly even when they clip your wings. Mom finally broke the silence. Your dad and I, we didn't understand. We thought we were helping. Her voice cracked on the last word. I watched the way her hands trembled, and for a moment I saw the young woman she must have been before life hardened her edges. I stepped closer, my heels clicking softly on the worn wood. I know, I said, my voice low but steady. But helping someone doesn't mean deciding their future for them. Dad cleared his throat. We're proud of you, Lila. More than we can say. The name, my name, carried a weight I hadn't felt in years. I believed him. Not because he suddenly approved of my success or understood every choice I'd made, but because there was no defensiveness left in his tone. We sat there for a while, not talking, just letting the quiet settle. Outside, the city hummed, the sunset painting the brick buildings gold. I thought of the nights I'd spent here, crying into secondhand pillows, clutching that ceramic bird like a lifeline. I thought of the deals closed, the midnight deadlines met, the version of myself I had built piece by piece. I reached for the bird again, running my thumb along its tiny wing. I kept flying, I whispered, not just to them, but to the girl I used to be. And for the first time, I felt it completely. The fierce, unshakable grace of a woman who had built her own sky.